Hi, this is Kathy from Kathy's Crochet Closet, and today's tutorial is going to help us line a flat bag with a double lining. So let me explain that a little bit. When I was designing these new round bags with the curved top edge, I was trying to figure out how I was going to line the bags, plus how I was going to explain the lining in the instructions. And I came up with the idea of doubling the lining, and it seemed to solve a bunch of problems at the same time. So one issue that we have sometimes with crochet bags is that you might want to use a fun print like the one I've selected here. And when you put a print on the inside, sometimes it shows through the open work on the outside of the bag. And I just don't like the way that looks. I would rather see, like here, you can see solid fabric peeking through the holes in the crochet work. So by doing a double lining, you can have a print on the inside and a solid on the outside. Another reason that this works is because when you're doing a lining that has a curve at the top, it would be really tricky to just fold the fabric over and have it lay flat. It doesn't work on a curved edge. It would work on a rectangular or a square bag or anything with a flat edge, straight across at the top. But something with a curved edge, it's pretty tricky just to turn it and hem it and make it look nice. Another reason that I like this method, if I had made this bag in black or maybe navy, something dark, I might want to have a black fabric peeking through. But on the inside, a black lining is really hard to use. It makes it hard to find things in your bag. So then you could put a lighter color on the inside and have the outside be black. And then one more reason that I think this method really works nicely is because a double lining makes the bag more stable. So I'll just let you take a peek here. Now, I did not use a print on the inside. I guess I'm just boring. I used the same fabric on the inside and the outside. But this bag is really nice and stable because I've got two thicknesses of lining fabric here. Plus I used kind of a heavier, almost a canvas fabric to make it even more stable. So those are just a few of the reasons that I think you're really going to like trying this method of making a lining for a bag. All right, so I have a piece of paper that we're going to use to draw our template on. It's actually just two pieces of computer paper that I taped together. You could use the back side of wrapping paper. You could use a brown paper bag cut out and taped together, anything. But just make sure you have enough room on all sides of your bag to be able to cut out at least a 1/2 inch larger than what we're going to draw on the paper. So I've centered my bag. And in the pattern for this bag, it tells you to do this template before the strap is attached, but I've already completed this bag and lined it and everything, so we're just going to work around the strap. But I'm just taking my pencil and running it along the side. If anything, you want the line to be slightly smaller than your bag. And I will continue, and I'll be back. Okay, so there's the outline of the bag. It's not very dark because I just used a regular old pencil. And that will work. The next step is to draw a second line around the bag outline. And at the top of the bag, you want your second line just to be a 1/4 inch above the line. But for the rest of the bag, we're going to go about a 1/2 inch. So just do your best. You don't need a ruler. And draw about a 1/2 inch larger than your bag, just like that. And then for this edge, you're about a 1/4 inch. So I would just continue and then just bring it together. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that outline, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I finished the second line. You can see it's not perfect. It's way too wide down here. But when I cut it out on this second line, I will just fix all that because we want it to be 1/2 inch, because when you sew the seam, you're going to sew 1/2 inch seams. So I'll fix it when I'm cutting it, just like you will. You can see the top edge is about 1/4 inch up, and the rest of it is 1/2 inch. I'm going to cut it out and I'll be back. So here's our completed template. I've cut it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the next step will be laying it on top of the fabric that we're going to use for the lining. So today I'm going to guide you through the steps of making a lining for the smaller Reel Time Crossbody, the one that was cream colored. And I just picked up these two fabric quarters, sometimes they're called fat quarters, at Joann Fabrics. You can also get them at other craft stores or fabric stores. And I've even seen them at Walmart, if your Walmart has a crafts area. So this size of a fabric square should be large enough to cut out the fabric that we need for our bag. So I just wanted to show you how the template of the small crossbody bag just fits on this fabric that I showed you, the fabric quarter. And you know, I had to fold it in half because we need 2 layers. So if you're doing the larger bag or any larger bag, you're probably going to need a larger piece of fabric. You could buy 2 of these or just buy fabric by the yard. So the next step is that we're going to take our doubled pieces of fabric. So I've got 2 layers of what I'm calling the outer lining. I'm just going to stack the other lining piece on top, so I've got my 2 layers of inner lining. And since these fabrics are fairly thin, it'll be easy, I think, to cut through all 4 layers at once. And then we take our template and place on top. And I like to pin my template or pattern pieces to my fabric. Other people are okay with just holding on to it. Some people use weights. I guess I'm old school. I've been pinning my pieces since I was a kid. And I'm just going to put a few pins here because this template is pretty stiff. And I don't think it's really going anywhere. So there we go. And it's all ready to cut out. So I've already started cutting, and it's pretty easy. You're just following your template guide and cutting around the edge of your paper. So I finished cutting out my fabric. I unpinned my template. There are my 2 layers of that pretty blue crazy print. And then my 2 boring beige layers, which will show through the bag because I like to see something neutral peeking through my crochet. The next step, and it doesn't matter which pair of pieces you start with, but the next step is that we're going to be sewing around this long circular edge in one long seam. Now I know some of you will do this by hand. I use a sewing machine. But either way, you're going to sew a 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric. You'll do that for this set of pieces, and then you'll do the same thing for the other set. I finished sewing my long seam around the circular edge of the fabric, and I used blue just so that you could really see my seam. I did the same thing on the other piece, long seam around. The next step is to trim that seam. So I'm just going to use my scissors and trim so that there's about 1/4 inch left. So this one is trimmed, and next I'll do the other one. Since I'm a picky sewer, I would probably use my sewing machine and run a zigzag stitch around the whole edge, but you really don't need to because again, this is a doubled lining. So these raw edges are going to end up next to each other inside your bag, and I don't really think there's going to be a problem with any of the fabric unraveling. So both linings, the outer and the inner, are trimmed along the edge, and the next step is you just pick one, doesn't matter, I think I'll pick the plain one, and you turn it right side out. So I'm just going to turn it this way. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right. And once you have it right side out, you're going to place it inside of the other lining piece so that the two right sides end up being together. So you can see this is a right side and here's the right side. So when I place this inside, those right sides will be together. I'll go ahead and do that and then I'll be back. Okay, so I wrestled this outer lining actually to the inside. The two right sides are together. And the next step is that you're going to pin this edge together so that these side seams are matching. So I'm going to take a minute to really match this up. And then I'm just going to use a pin. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other side first. I find that if I do my side seams first, it makes everything easier. And I'm just pushing both of these seam allowance pieces to the same side. And now you can go ahead and pin the rest of it. Just a few pins. Or if you're a person who uses clips. But as I said, I'm old school. I use my good old straight pins. And make sure I have one here at the center front, and then I'll just keep pinning on the other side. Once I have it all pinned, I'm going to sew again, and I'm using my sewing machine, but again, you could do this by hand. And even though we only had a 1/4 inch above our bag edge when we made the template, you're actually going to sew a 1/2 inch seam. And the reason we're doing that is because the top of your lining isn't really going to be all the way to the top edge of your bag. It's going to be down about a 1/4 inch. Now you're not going to sew all the way around completely. You're going to leave a 2-inch gap because we're going to want to turn this whole piece inside out eventually. So I'll move my pin just to kind of show you. I'll end my sewing here, and maybe I'll start here. So I'll go around and end here, and this will be a 2-inch gap used to turn the whole thing inside out. Okay, I've sewn my top seam all the way around. Here's where my 2-inch opening is, but you can see I've made my seam all the way around. On the inside you can really see the seam because I use that blue thread. Our next step is that we're going to trim this seam also to 1/4 inch like we did the other seam, even trimming along this edge where we didn't sew a seam. So you just cut about a 1/4 inch off all the way around. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this double lining in the first place was because it's really hard to just fold down the top of an edge of a bag. And in this case, it's going to be much easier because we have a doubled lining. But one more thing we're going to do just to make it all lay really nice is snip into the seam allowance a few places right here at the deepest part of this curve. And I'm really just going to do 3 snips. I'm going to do one right about at the center of the curve, and notice I'm not cutting through the seam. And then another one maybe 1/2 inch away, or not quite 1/2 inch, 3/8, and a 3rd snip here. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just be careful when you're doing this that you don't cut through your sewing. You'll be really mad if you do. One more snip. That's just to make it lay nicer when we turn it. Okay, so we're ready for the next step. You're just going to reach in and pull out the piece that we had hidden inside. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, we've got it out. Now find that spot where we had the open seam. Here it is here. And we're going to use that hole to turn the whole piece inside out. So you just kind of push it through. Mine's going pretty easily. And then the next part is just really pulling it out and making it look nicer. Okay, so there's my fun inner lining sewn to the neutral outer lining. And now we're ready for the last magic step. take the inner lining and put it, just fold on your sewn edge here and push the inner lining into the outer lining. Sorry if I went off camera. And try to smooth it out and really get that edge up at the top. If you want, you could even iron. You heard me, iron this top edge to make it nice and crisp. I know lots of us don't really like to iron anymore, me included. So you can also just kind of use your fingers to really press it. And now here's our opening that we use to turn. So use your fingers just to kind of press down that 1/4 inch so it matches the rest, and do that on both pieces. Kind of press it with your fingers. And then once you have that matched up, might be a nice idea to pin it just to keep it in place. Okay, so I could straighten this a little more, but I think you can see what we've got here. We've got our doubled lining, and this is going to be peeking through the crochet open work, and then you'll open your bag and that fun lining will be on the inside. When you are going to put this in your crocheted bag, you have a couple options here. If you want, you could hand sew this 2-inch opening together, but I didn't bother because I was using a sewing machine to sew this into my bag, and I just made sure it was pinned just right. And so when I sewed this with my machine into the crocheted bag, it sewed it closed. So that's an option if you're using your sewing machine. So the next step, you'll just place this whole lining inside your bag. And let me show you quick on my completed bag. I'm sorry it doesn't have a fun print lining. It just has a nice tasteful beige. But on my completed bag, you can see I've got the edge of the lining about a 1/4 inch from the edge of my bag. And my sewing machine doesn't have any trouble sewing crochet, and it's not a fancy machine at all. It's just a good old basic sewing machine. And I always sew so that the crochet is down on the machine, and then I can see that I'm, what I'm doing on the top. I'm always trying to sew nice and close to the edge, as neat as I can. And you'll just sew that in all the way around. When I was done, I added these sew-on magnetic snaps. You wouldn't have to, but I like to have a little bit of a closure, and that makes a nice close for this bag. So I hope you enjoyed learning about how to make the doubled lining. I hope you'll try it. I think once you do, you're gonna realize it'll really work for lots of bags, not just round bags. I have another pattern coming up, which is in the Reel Time collection, and this is called the Reel Time shoulder bag, and it's another curved bag. So I followed the same idea here, and I cut out a template. The only thing is, when you cut out a template for this bag, you're not going to include the straps. So I just continued my top edge. When I drew my line, I lifted up the strap, and I just continued drawing underneath to match with the side outline. But I use the same method for this bag. So this bag, look for it's coming soon. And the Reel Time Crossbody bags are already in my Etsy shop and in my Ravelry shop, so you can find them there. I hope you'll try this lining technique on one of your own projects. It'll work great on a rectangular bag or a square bag, any bag that is flat.